Section 2 from Of Mice and Men. The bunkhouse was a long, rectangular building. Inside, the walls were whitewashed and the floor unpainted. In three walls, there were small, square windows, and in the fourth, a solid door with a wooden latch. Against the walls were 8 bunks, 5 of them made up with blankets, and other 3 showing their burlap ticking. Over each bunk there was nailed an apple box with the opening forward so that it made 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupant of the bunk. And these shelves were loaded with little articles, soap and talcum powder, razors, and those Western magazines ranchmen love to read and scoff at and secretly believe. And there were medicines on the shelves and little vials, combs, and from nails on the box sides, a few neckties. Near one wall there was a black cast-iron stove. Its stovepipe was going straight up through the ceiling. In the middle of the room stood a big square table littered with playing cards, and around it were grouped boxes for the players to sit on. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun threw a bright, dust-laden bar through one of the side windows, and in out of the beam flies shot like rushing stars. The wooden latch raised, the door opened, and a tall, stoop-shouldered old man came in. He was dressed in blue jeans, and he carried a big plush broom in his left hand. Behind him came George, and behind George, Lenny. "The boss was expecting you last night," the old man said. "He was sore as hell when you wasn't here to go out this morning." He pointed with his right arm, and out the sleeve came a round stick like wrist, but no hand. "You can have them 2 beds over there," he said, indicating 2 bunks near the stove. George stepped over and threw his blankets down on the burlap sack of straw that was a mattress. He looked into the box shelf and then picked a small yellow can from it. "Say, what the hell's this?" "I don't know," said the old man. "Says positively kills lice, roaches, and other scourges." "What the hell kind of bed you giving us anyways?" "We don't want no pants rabbits." Rabbits in your pants. The old swamper shifted his broom and held it between his elbow and his side while he held out his hand for the can. He studied the label carefully. "Tell you what," he said finally, "last guy that has been in this bed was a blacksmith. Hell of a nice fellow and as clean as a guy as you want to meet. Used to wash his hands even after he ate. Then how come he's got graybacks?" George was working up a slow anger. Lenny put his bindle on the neighboring bunk and sat down. He watched George with open mouth. "Tell you what," said the old swamper. "This here blacksmith name of Whitey was the kind of guy that would put the stuff around even if there wasn't no bugs, just to make sure, see? Tell you what he used to do. At meals, he'd peel his boiled potatoes, and he'd take out ever spot, no matter what kind, before he'd eat. And if there was a red splotch on an egg, he'd scrape it off. Finally, quit about the food. That's the kind of guy he was. Clean. Used to dress up Sundays, even when he wasn't going no place. Put on a necktie even, and then sat in the bunkhouse." "I ain't so sure," said George skeptically. What did you say he quit for?" The old man put the yellow can in his pocket, and he rubbed his bristly white whiskers with his knuckles. Why, he just quit. The way a guy will. Says it was the food. Just wanted to move. Didn't give no other reason but the food. Just says, give me my time one night the way any guy would." George lifted his tick and looked underneath it. He leaned over and inspected the sacking closely. Immediately Lenny got up and did the same with his bed. Finally George seemed satisfied. He unrolled his bindle and put things on a shelf. His razor and a bar of soap, his comb and a bottle of pills, his liniment and leather wristband. Then he made his bed up neatly with blankets. The old man said, "I guess the boss will be out here in a minute. He was sure burned when you was here this morning. Come right in when we was eatin' breakfast and says, 'Where the hell's them new men?' And he give the stable book hell too." George patted a wrinkle out of his bed and sat down. Give the stable buck hell? He asked. Crazy. Sure. You see, the stable buck's a nigger. Nigger, huh? Yeah, nice fellow, too. Got a crooked back where a horse kicked him. The boss gives him hell when he's mad, but the stable buck don't give a damn about that. He reads a lot. Got books in his room. What kind of guy is the boss? George asked. Well, he's a pretty nice fella. Gets pretty mad sometimes, but he's pretty nice. Tell you what. Know he done Christmas? Bring a gallon of whiskey right in here and says, drink, hearty boys. Christmas comes but once a year. The hell he did. Whole gallon? Yes, sir. Jesus, we had fun. They let the nigger come in that night. Little skinny, name of Schmitty. Took after the nigger. Done pretty good, too. The guys wouldn't let him use his feet, so the nigger got him. If he could have used his feet, Schmitty says he would have killed the nigger. The guys said on account of the nigger's got a crooked back. Smitty can't use his feet. He paused in relish of the memory. After that, the guys went into Soledad and raised hell. I didn't go in there. I ain't got poop no more. Lenny was just finishing making his bed. The wooden latch raised again, and the door opened. A little stocky man stood in the open doorway. He wore blue jean trousers, a flannel shirt, a black unbuttoned vest, and a black coat. His thumbs were stuck in his belt. On each side of the square steel buckle, on his head was a soiled brown Stetson hat, and he wore high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man. The old swamper looked quickly at him, and then shuffled to the door, rubbing his whiskers with his knuckles as he went. Them guys just come, he said, and shuffled past the boss and out the door. The boss stepped in the room with the short, quick steps of fat-legged men. I wrote Murray and Reddy. I wanted 2 men this morning. You got your work slips? George reached into his pockets and produced the slips and handed them to the boss. It wasn't Murray and Reddy's fault. It says here on the slip that you was to be here at work this morning. George looked down at his feet. Push driver give us a bum steer, he said. We had to walk 10 miles. Says we was here when he wasn't. We couldn't get no rides in the morning. The boss squinted his eyes. Well, I had to send out the grain team short 2 buckers. Won't do any good to go out now till after dinner. He pulled his time book out of his pocket and opened it to where the pencil was stuck between the leaves. George scowled meaningfully at Lenny, and Lenny nodded to show that he was understood. The boss licked his pencil. What's your name? George Miltron. And what's yours? George said. His name's Lenny Small. The names were entered in the book. Let's see this as the 20th. Noon the 20th. He closed the book. Where you boys been working? Up around weed, said George. You too? You too? To Lenny? Yeah, him too, said George. The boss pointed a playful finger at Lenny. He ain't much of a talker, is he? No, he ain't. But he's sure a hell of a good worker. Strong as a bull. Lenny smiled to himself. Strong as a bull, he repeated. George scowled at him, and Lenny dropped his head in shame of having forgot. The boss said suddenly, Listen, Small. Lenny raised his head. What can you do? In a panic, Lenny looked at George for help. He can do anything you tell him, said George. He's a good skinner. He can wrestle grain bags, drive a cultivator. He can do anything. Just give him a try. The boss turned on George. Then why don't you let him answer? What you trying to put over? George broke in loudly. Oh, I ain't saying he's bright. He ain't. But I say he's a goddamn, I don't want to say that word, good worker. He can put up a 400-pound bale. The boss deliberately put the little book in his pocket. He hooked his thumbs in his belt and squinted, one eye nearly closed. Say, what you sellin'? Huh? I said, what stake you got in this guy? You taking his pay away from him? No, course I ain't. Why do you think I'm selling him out? Well, I never seen one guy take so much trouble from another guy. I just like to know what your interest is." George said, "He's my cousin. I told his lady I'd take care of him. He got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. He's all right, just ain't bright. But he can do anything you tell him." The boss turned halfway. "Well, God knows. Don't need any brains to buck barley bags. But don't you try to put nothing over, Milton. I got my eye on you. Why'd you quit in weed?" "Job was done," said George promptly. "What kind of job?" We was digging a cesspool." "All right. But don't try to put nothing over, 'cause you can't get away with nothing. I seen wise guys before. Go on out with the grain teams after dinner. They're picking up barley at the threshing machine. Go out with Slim's team." "Slim?" "Yeah. Big, tall Skinner. You'll see him at dinner." He turned abruptly and went to the door, but before he went out, he turned and looked for a long moment at the two men. I hate reading. When the sound of the footsteps had died away, George turned on Lenny. "So you wasn't going to say a word? You was going to leave your big flapper shut and leave me to do the talking? Damn near lost us the job." Lenny started hopelessly at his hands. "I forgot, George." "Yeah, you forgot. You always forget. And I get to talk you out of it." He sat down heavily on the bunk. "Now he's got his eyes on us. Now we got to be careful not to make no slips. You keep your big flapper shut after this." He fell morosely silent. "George, what you want now? I wasn't kicked in the head with no horse. Was I, George?" "Be a damn good thing if you was," George said viciously. "Save everybody a hell of a lot of trouble." We're just moving right along, aren't we? "You said I was your cousin, George?" "Well, that was a lie." And I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself." He stopped suddenly, stepped to the open front door and peered out. "Say, what the hell are you doing listening?" The old man came slowly into the room. He had his broom in his hand, and at his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, gray of muzzle and with pale, blind old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunting softly to help himself, and licking his grizzly, moth-eaten coat. The swamper watched him until he was settled. "I was listening. I was just standing in the shade a minute scratching my dog. I just now finished swamping at the wash house." "You was poking your big ears into our business," George said. "I don't like nobody to get nosy." The old man looked uneasily from George to Lenny, and then back. "I just come there," he said. "I didn't hear nothing you guys was saying. I ain't interested in nothing you was saying. A guy in a ranch don't ever listen, nor he doesn't ask no questions." "Damn right he doesn't," said George, slightly mollified. "Not if he wants to stay working long." But he was reassured by the swamper's defense. "Come on in and sit down a minute," he said. "That's a hell of an old dog." "Yeah, I had him ever since he was a pup. God, he was a good sheepdog when he was younger. He stood his broom against the wall and rubbed his white bristled cheek with his knuckles." "How'd you like the boss?" he asked. "Pretty good. Seemed all right. He's a nice fellow," the swamper agreed. "You got to take him right." At that moment a young man came into the bunkhouse. A thin young man with a brown face, with brown eyes and a head of tightly curled hair. He wore a work glove on his left hand, and like the boss, he wore high-heeled boots. "Seen my old man?" he asked. The swamper said, "He was here just a minute ago, Curly. Went over to the cookhouse, I think." "I'll try to catch him," said Curly. His eyes passed over the new man, and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows, and his hands closed into the fists. He stiffened and went into a slight crouch. His glance was at once calculating and pugnacious. Lenny squirmed under the look and shifted his feet nervously. Curly stepped gingerly close to him. You the new guys the old man was waiting for?"